Are you ready, snails?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you.
Aye, aye, Captain!
Oh, who lives in a digital society?
Casey Snails!
Frenetic and handsome and big brain as hay.
Casey Snails!
If radical ramblings be something you wish,
Casey Snails!
then drop on the deck and flop like a fish.
Casey Snails!
Ready? Casey Snails, Casey Snails, Casey Snails, Casey Snails.
What's up, Snail Squad? I'm Casey Snails, and welcome back to my channel. Snails, 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 snails. Longtime viewers will know that I have a very special stream prepared tonight, but for any new snailers out there, hi, hello, welcome. My name's Casey. I've spent the past 2 years in the Master of Environmental Studies program at the University of Pennsylvania, and most importantly, I just finished my master's thesis. I could not have gotten to this point without my Snail Squad support, so truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Anyway, to celebrate the completion of my degree, tonight's stream is where I get to finally share the conclusions of my research. Shall we begin? Now presenting the degrowth of social media, the structure and function of a convivial social media ecosystem. I'll start with a question. What can we do as over-industrialized human activity continues to disrupt the biosphere while digital technology corporations fan the flames of social crises? Huh? 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 Yes! Thank you, Skyleaf. We can turn to degrowth. For all you new snailers joining us tonight who might be unfamiliar with degrowth, it's a word with many meanings. It's been called a provocative slogan, an academic discourse, a new imaginary, a semantic tool, a missile word. But what actually is it? To define degrowth, I'll first offer a brief history. Rooted in the environmental critiques of the 60s and 70s found in landmark works like Silent Spring and the Limits to Growth report, degrowth was first presented in 1972 by French intellectual André Gorz in a public debate where he used the term décroissance to question whether planetary stability was compatible with capitalism. Gradually spreading through France and then other European countries from the turn of the 70s to the turn of the millennium, degrowth garnered more international attention and a formal translation into English at the first International Degrowth Conference in Paris, 2008. Since then, degrowth has continued to inspire public debate, academic scholarship, and practical organizing. A classic definition of degrowth comes from Schneider et al., who defined degrowth as an equitable downscaling of production and consumption that increases human well-being and enhances ecological conditions at the local and global level in the short and long term. In other words, degrowth is a process in which a society decreases its ecological impact and increases its quality of life and environment. But degrowth is not just about producing and consuming less. It's about producing, consuming, and living in fundamentally different ways. Instead of societies structured around the endless pursuit of infinite economic growth, degrowth invites us to explore alternative ways of life filled with relationships, practices, and beliefs imbued with values like care, autonomy, and sufficiency. Concrete examples of degrowth in action include small-scale practices like a community farm and a housing co-op, large-scale policy proposals like reduced working hours and a dedicated income for care work, and broad calls for systemic transformation like the abolishment of the prison industrial complex and the seizing of the means of production. All that being said, degrowth is not without its detractors. Critics commonly conflate degrowth with a recession, but that is a false comparison, because reducing the GDP of a nation's economy is not necessarily a goal of degrowth. Instead, degrowth seeks to completely transform our understanding of the economy, moving us away from market logics and transactional interactions towards economic relationships and practices centered around care, gift-giving, and solidarity.
Snaring is caring, as they say.
Another common critique concerns the relationship between the so-called global north and global south. Because degrowth originated in Europe and remains a primarily Eurocentric concept, critics highlight that degrowth runs the risk of perpetuating colonial continuities in which the global north continues its dominance over the global south by once again setting the agenda on ways of existence and global affairs. Dengler and Siebacher respond to this critique by highlighting that degrowth must not be misunderstood as a blueprint for a global transformation proposed by the global north and imposed on the global south, but rather as a northern supplement to southern ideas and movements which already exist. Linking these criticisms of degrowth is the need for context specificity. Yes, rich countries in the global north need to degrow first, but not all parts of the global north need to degrow. For example, here in the United States, sectors like the military-industrial complex and the petrochemical industry need to degrow, while other things like community-owned institutions and participatory democracy do need to grow, though degrowthers might prefer the verb deepen or expand. Noise? Y'all are hearing a noise? And it stopped. Weird. Okay. Well, ultimately, degrowth is a concept firmly rooted in the decolonial, feminist, and post-capitalistic movements working towards collective liberation. And it's also a fluid concept that is continually co-created and reproduced with every conversation, action, and publication. Even so, for the purposes of this live stream, I understand degrowth as an array of ideas and practices that, one, critique societies driven by the pursuit of infinite economic growth, and two, nurture reimagined ways of existence that prioritize socio-ecological well-being. Together, these ideas and practices pursue a number of interconnected transformations that cultivate conditions in which everyone can collectively create and live their own versions of the good life, all within interpersonal and planetary boundaries.
Saturday, September 4th, 2027. The outage started when the data centers burnt down. At least, that's what I heard on Transformation Now, the radio news show I like to listen to. The host said that no matter how hard Silicon Valley tried to weatherproof its bastions of our supposed digital futures, the unrelenting drought plaguing the American West since the turn of the 21st century created conditions ready to ignite at the strike of a match. The loss of the data centers on the West Coast would not have been as disastrous had other locations not also gone down. The radio show reported that in a series of unfortunate coincidences, natural calamities disrupted tech capitals around the world. Earthquakes in Japan, torrential rain in the Cambridge cluster, more wildfires in Virginia's data center alley. In the greater Houston area, the blackout of the corporate net has caused a surge of panic to spread throughout the region. We are all already anxious about whether or not Hurricane Wanda, a Category 5 storm, will hit Houston head-on in 2 days' time. So the outage means that meteorologists have no way of forecasting where the storm will make landfall. Classes at UH are canceled for now, so I'll be staying with my family in Richmond. We're planning on hunkering down these next 2 days. Others are evacuating the area, but we're hopeful that our house can weather the storm, having come out unscathed by the high floodwaters of Hurricane Harvey in 2017. It seems so long ago now. A decade since the historic tempest befell the city. May this storm pass with much less tragedy.
Alright. Welcome back, y'all. We appear to be having some technical difficulties, but I think that's all sorted now. Shall we continue? As you can probably guess by the title of my presentation, in my master's research, I analyze social media through the lens of degrowth. To do so, I draw upon three concepts: conviviality, social media, and a social media ecosystem. The first term, conviviality, comes from the Latin con, meaning with, and vivere, meaning to live, and it's usually used to describe situations where we're celebrating with one another in joyous and communal ways. To quote dictionary.com, it's feasting, drinking, and merry company. And while these definitions are certainly related in the context of my research, I'll be using conviviality in more theoretically dense and practically helpful ways first formulated by Austrian-born priest, social critic, and philosopher Ivan Illich. Illich was an outspoken critic of industrialized ways of life, writing several texts in the 1970s that sharply analyzed a number of sectors in society, like medicine and education. In his influential 1973 book, Tools for Conviviality, Illich turns his attention to tools. He uses the word tools based off the assumption that we, as humans, cannot satisfy all of our needs on our own. We need the help of tools. Therefore, Illich understands tools as objects we use to help meet needs. This encompassing definition includes all rationally designed devices, such as physical objects like a hammer, large machines like a car, and even social institutions like a hospital. It also includes social media. Illich's main argument throughout his work is that tools are now surpassing a boundary, beyond which they begin to produce more harm than good. To address this issue, Illich introduces conviviality, which he defines as the opposite of industrial productivity. For Illich, conviviality is a quality that emerges when we have specific kinds of relationships with the tools in our lives. In a convivial society, we would have the ability to make tools among which we can live, to shape them according to our own tastes, and to put them to use in caring for and about others. In other words, conviviality is a quality used to describe societies where we can build and use tools to help take care of ourselves and our communities, all on our own terms. More practically, Illich also describes conviviality as an analytical lens, a multidimensional balance of human life which can serve as a framework for evaluating our relation to our tools. Illich introduces this understanding as the multiple balance, which consists of 5 interrelated aspects: the balances of the biosphere, authentic activity, learning, power, and change. Each balance can be disrupted or maintained depending on the tool. The first balance, the balance of the biosphere, is maintained if our tools interact with planetary systems in caring and minimally harmful ways, and it's disrupted if tools harm the biosphere. Think of a composting facility, which helps turn organic matter into
soil yum-yums.
Now think of a garbage dump, which leaves organic matter to rot and turn into bad no-nos like methane. The second balance, the balance of authentic activity, is maintained if we have the ability to meet other needs in adaptable ways with or without a variety of tools, and it's disrupted if we are forced to meet needs using a specific type of tool. Think of a city with robust infrastructure for multimodal public transportation. In this city, if I wanted to meet the need to travel, I could satisfy this need in a variety of ways on my own terms. I could walk, bike, take the trolley, ride the bus. Now think of a city dominated by infrastructure for cars. In this city, if I wanted to travel, I would be forced to drive a car. The third balance, the balance of learning, is maintained if our tools are accessible to us in terms of knowledge and use, and it's disrupted if tools require highly specialized forms of knowledge. Look at this water bottle, for example. It's very easy to learn the function of this tool through everyday use. I open it, I drink, I close it, I'm done. Now think of a computer. Sure, I can turn it on, but if I open it up and look around in its insides, I would have no idea what the heck is going on! The fourth balance, the balance of power, is maintained if tools help create equitable relationships, and it's disrupted if a tool centralizes power. Think of a worker cooperative, where the workers are also the owners of the business, giving them direct power over their organization. Now think of a corporation, where the ability to influence the entire company is largely accumulated in the grasp of the C-suite execs and board of directors. The fifth balance, the balance of change, is maintained if the modifications of a tool are appropriate for a given context, and it's disrupted if a tool changes for no good reason. Think of this chair. It's still serving its purpose, no problem, so no changes to it need to be made. Now think of a smartphone. New models roll out every year, even though previous models still work fine. Is that noise again? And it stopped. Okay, I don't really know what's going on. I do live on a busy intersection, so... where were we? In summary, conviviality is both, 1, the quality describing ways of life where we can build and use tools in caring, creative, and autonomous ways, and 2, a multidimensional framework consisting of 5 interconnected balances that can be disrupted or maintained depending on the tool.
Thursday, September 9th, 2027. Hurricane Wanda hit the greater Houston area 2 days ago. The storm's past us now, to where, I'm not sure. The corporate net is still dark. Transformation Now says that meteorologists have managed to use radio waves to access the satellite data necessary to predict Wanda's path. Yet these forecasts remain fuzzy. At least the winds have died down. What was especially destructive was the storm surge that flooded the ship channel before Wanda made landfall. Local radio operators on the emergency channel say that Wanda's 17-foot storm surge inundated Buffalo Bayou, the wall of water almost triggering a catastrophe that scientists have likened to be on the scale of Chernobyl. From what I hear on the radio, it's still hard to know how many tankers have been damaged, but what's certain is that several chemical fires have broken out along the ship channel. People live in that area. Here's hoping the winds don't bring whatever's burning to the western suburbs of Houston. On a personal note, my family's managing fine, thank goodness. My parents and I brought out our backup generators, and my sister and her husband are in the midst of booting up our own personal towers. As much as the internet stresses me out, I'm looking forward to being back online. There are people I'm eager to communicate with.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, good, great. Sorry, y'all. Something weird is going on in my house. Power keeps cutting in and out. There's that weird noise, and this painting fell off the wall. But you know, what do we do in the face of adversity? We keep snailing. That's right. And that's what we're gonna do right now. Snails away! The second concept central to my research is one we're all familiar with, social media. And just like how common social media is in everyday life, scholarly definitions of social media are also widespread. And here are just some of the definitions present in the literature. I'll give you a moment to look through them. As evidenced, scholars generally define social media as the digital tools that help facilitate online social interactions. And amidst these overlapping definitions, other scholars also provide concrete models of social media that break this tool down into distinct components. For the purposes of my research, I've synthesized some of these models into one with 7 different components: affordances, ownership, business model, technologies, scale, abstraction, and topology. As defined by Van Dyke, Rajendra Nicolucci, and Zuckerman and Zuli et al., affordances refers to the functionality a platform offers users. Ownership is whether a platform is publicly governed, community-based, nonprofit-based, or corporately owned. Business model is how a platform pays the bills. Technologies is the underlying technical architecture of a social media. Scale is the ideal size in terms of active users. Abstraction is the degree to which the internal details of a social media are kept hidden. And topology is a network's logical shape or layout, as illustrated by how various nodes are connected. Therefore, I understand social media to be the sum total of components that allow us to create and communicate information via interconnected networks of online profiles, thereby partially reproducing social reality. This brings us to the last concept I'll introduce, a social media ecosystem. This commonly used analogy reminds us that multiple media forms and practices exist in relation to one another and ourselves, and it emphasizes the dynamic nature of a continually changing media landscape. I'll be using this concept in explicitly ecological terms by evoking the concepts of ecosystem structure and function. Similar to how ecosystem structure refers to the biotic and abiotic objects that relate to one another in a given context, like the rocks, birds, trees, and soils in a forest, social media ecosystem structure refers to the different components of a social media. And much like how ecosystem function refers to the phenomena that emerge as an ecosystem's structural elements interact, like nutrient cycling, social media ecosystem function refers to the online sociality that is enabled by social media structural components. With these 3 theoretical concepts laid out, conviviality, social media, and a social media ecosystem, I'll now present my research question. What is the structure and function of a convivial social media ecosystem? To answer this question, I collected data on the components of 6 social media: Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Mastodon, Decidim, and iNaturalist. First up is Facebook, which was created in February 2004 as a social network solely for Harvard University students before opening up to the public in September 2006. It centers around the Facebook profile, where people can share photos, pictures, status updates, and a variety of other things. Lately, though, Facebook's become more and more bloated, trying to incorporate things like online shopping, gaming, podcasts, dating. Second is TikTok, which came about in August 2018 when parent company ByteDance bought Musical.ly, another social media application, and merged it with earlier versions of TikTok. On TikTok, people can create and share videos lasting anywhere from 15 seconds to 10 minutes. And what's great about TikTok is that the videos are full screen and they play automatically when you open the app. That's where they're pulling you into its feed. Ooh. Third is Twitter, which originally launched in July 2006. Twitter centers around microblogging. It lets people share short posts called tweets, which can be up to 280 characters long. And I see your comments, but I'm just gonna ignore the problem and continue. Fourth is Mastodon, which was created in 2016 as an alternative to Twitter. Mastodon is decentralized and federated. Decentralized refers to the fact that, unlike Twitter, Mastodon is not one single website hosted on a specific set of servers that everyone connects to. Instead, Mastodon can be thought of as a universe filled with independent and autonomous websites or instances that are hosted on a network of servers, and people can then join any number of these instances. And federated refers to the fact that these autonomous instances can connect with and communicate with one another. Fifth is Decidim, which was created in February 2016 when the Barcelona City Council launched it to coordinate the drafting of a municipal action plan. Decidim is designed to facilitate social organization and participatory democracy. On Decidim, groups of people have the ability to make proposals, go through a voting process, and then make collective decisions together. New York City, for example, uses it to facilitate participatory budgeting in its districts. Sixth is iNaturalist, which was created in 2008 by graduate students at UC Berkeley's School of Information. iNaturalist is a social network dedicated to mapping biodiversity data. On iNaturalist, people can upload photos, recordings, or observations about the more than human beings around them. And then other people, or even iNaturalist's computer vision algorithm, then offers species identifications. With my study objects outlined, I'll now briefly discuss my methodology. First, I collected data on the 7 components of each social media. Second, I analyzed these components using the multiple balance of conviviality. And third, I then constructed my understanding of a convivial social media ecosystem. Hello?
Friday, September 17th, 2027. 10 days since Wanda hit. When my family got our home servers online, we were able to reestablish our function as an internet exchange point for our neighborhood's mesh network. The Legatos and the Nyokas are the other households that serve as community IXPs. Now that all of our connections were secure, our neighborhood regained access to the broader decentralized internet that remained online, even in the wake of the corporate outage. The butlers, wards, and parks were then able to reboot our community's Decidim instance, which they all co-host. I'm glad, since the week after Wanda oversaturated the land, several intense thunderstorms passed through, bringing severe floods. About a year ago, our community used Decidim to collectively create emergency response plans for a variety of anticipated disasters. And now that the instance was up, we were able to enact our flood protocol. Families in need of rescue or support create posts detailing their situations and needs, and households with boats then coordinate the provision of supplies and assistance. My family doesn't have a boat, but I was sure to drop off some of my sister's lemon tarts with Victor Butler before he and his sibling went out to support the Changs. A little treat helps ease a crisis. With our internet online, I was also able to check in on the Mastodon instance created for one of my classes in my digital media major. Those of us in the class with mesh network infrastructure were able to access the Mastodon, and I was glad I could use it to check in with some of my friends. Professor Sander Clemens is lightening the mood as usual, and people seem to be doing okay, though Frank is saying that huge sections of the city are still submerged. Others talk about how the rollout of federal support remains difficult given the blackout of the corporate internet. Let's hope it comes back on soon.
Hi. Yes, I'm okay. I don't really know what's going on. Just a bunch of weird stuff happening. Let's just finish this thing. To conclude, I'll now present my understanding of a convivial social media ecosystem by going through each convivial balance, identifying the components I deem relevant, and then discussing the qualities each component must have in order to maintain the balance. I'll start with the balance of the biosphere. A bounded scale and ecological affordances are relevant here. If a social media has a bounded scale, then it has an explicitly identified size that it seeks to stay under. For example, many moderators on Mastodon will make sure that their instance stays under a specific size because effective content moderation becomes difficult past a certain threshold. And because of this respected boundary, the instance then uses less energy and resources, thus decreasing its impact on the biosphere. And if a social media has ecological affordances, then it enables end users to perform ecologically related actions. And while all of my study objects have this capacity, iNaturalist is the only social media explicitly designed around relating with the more than human world. Because iNaturalist is focused on interacting with beyond human beings in intentional ways, its ecological affordances help maintain the balance of the biosphere. Next is the balance of authentic activity. Hybridized affordances are relevant here. If a social media has hybridized affordances, then it explicitly highlights its own optionality. In other words, it identifies that a person can satisfy the need that initially brought them to social media outside of social media. Decidim stands out in this regard. Although Decidim seeks to facilitate social organization and participatory democracy, it highlights the need for an adaptable and hybrid approach where community participation occurs in both in-person and digital settings. Because Decidim encourages the satisfaction of needs in a variety of ways on people's own terms, it helps maintain the balance of authentic activity. After this is the balance of learning. Minimal abstraction is pertinent here. If a social media has minimal abstraction, then its inner workings are readily available. For example, iNaturalist, Mastodon, and Decidim are all built using free and open source software, meaning that their source code is publicly available. Even more, Mastodon and Decidim have websites dedicated to the documentation of these tools. These documents contain all of the critical information about the inner workings of these tools, as well as step-by-step instructions for creating and maintaining a Mastodon or Decidim website. Because these social media put effort into reducing their abstraction, they help maintain the balance of learning. Next up is the balance of power. Diverse ownership and counter-hegemonic business models are relevant here. If a social media has a diverse ownership structure, then no one single entity owns the entire social media. Instead, a variety of independent and autonomous actors own specific iterations of a social media. For example, the instance-based nature of Mastodon and Decidim mean that a wide variety of social actors, from individual people to large organizations, can own a Mastodon or Decidim website. This diverse ownership structure then helps maintain the balance of power by ensuring that direct autonomy over social media is not accumulated in the grasp of one particular entity. And if a social media has a counter-hegemonic business model, then it does not fund itself by participating in and upholding surveillance capitalism. For example, on Mastodon, ads are explicitly banned. Instead, a website on Mastodon or Decidim can be funded in a variety of other ways, including via the economic principles central to degrowth transformations. These counter-hegemonic business models then help maintain the balance of power by building economic systems outside of capitalism. Last is the balance of change. Distributed ownership and decentralized topology are relevant here. If a social media has a distributed ownership structure, then a wide variety of actors have direct autonomy over a wide variety of social media. This means that more people have direct power to shape a social media, which can help ensure changes to it are relevant to the community, thus helping maintain the balance of change. And if a social media has a decentralized topology, then its network arrangement consists of many well-connected nodes as opposed to one single central node. This decentralization then makes the entire network more resilient to disruption. For example, Mastodon's decentralized topology means that even if one Mastodon instance went down, there would still be a plethora of other instances up and running, thus making the social media more resilient to change. In summary, the robust presence of these components in a social media ecosystem helps maintain the multiple balance of conviviality. But even if a social media was completely made up of these components, multiple threats to conviviality would still remain due to one specific component: technologies. Once again, the technologies component refers to the underlying technical architecture of a social media. Think of things like data centers, smartphones, and programming languages. These digital technologies require massive amounts of energy, resources, and highly specialized forms of knowledge, meaning they disrupt the balances of the biosphere and learning. Even so, I still believe that conviviality can emerge if a majority of the other components in a social media help maintain the multiple balance. Ultimately, the main point I want to emphasize is this: social media is a tool, and tools are meant to help us meet our needs. What we see now are social media that are too big, too unwieldy, too complicated to the point that they produce more harm than good. Swept up by the hype churned by false tech idols, the social media present in our lives oftentimes fail to meet many of our needs. Instead, they mainly meet the need of infinite accumulation of attention, engagement, and profit, extractivist purposes that solely serve the corporate actors behind our most popular platforms. But what if instead we change the stories we told ourselves about social media? What if instead of the corporate narratives dominating today, we thought about social media in the ecological terms of structure and function? Doing so would allow us to focus on the individual components that make up social media. And through the lens of conviviality, we can then think about how existing components must change and what new components must be built in order for social media to better support degrowth transformations. From there, we'd be able to cultivate.
Tuesday, March 7th, 2028. It's been 6 months since Wanda passed through Greater Houston, half a year since the corporate internet first went out. Although the corporate web is currently up and running, there have been at least 10 outages these past few months, if my count's correct. In Greater Houston, the blackouts have compelled city officials to look into social media like Decidim and Mastodon for emergency communications. When the mayor of Houston caught wind of how effective our neighborhood's response to Wanda was, she invited some of our community members to give a presentation to City Council on Decidim and disaster response. This meeting then led to the establishment of a committee dedicated to cultivating local internet resilience at the neighborhood level throughout Greater Houston. All of this makes me hopeful that, even in the face of looming storms and corporate outages, these digital tools will help people connect, organize, and give care to one another. Even so, there's still a lot to worry about with these digital tools, namely how people can use them to harm others. In one of my classes this semester on the far right and digital technology, we've discussed how white nationalist groups have used the open source software of Mastodon to create their own social media platforms. In fact, white nationalist groups captured Waco 2 weeks ago, and it's been documented that they used Decidim's source code to build out their infrastructure for online organizing. In the wake of the capture, social unrest has once again re-erupted in Greater Houston. Local white supremacist groups, emboldened by the move, have launched attacks into several key pieces of infrastructure and...
Oh, what worlds we inherit. Reckless rage of prideful lies, sticky traps of wicked binds, extractive pulls of dying tides. Oh, what worlds we inherit! Flashing lights of dazzling digitality, sprawling sounds of boundless urbanity, emergent moments of creative conviviality. Oh, what worlds we inherit! toxic views of virtual crowds, warping whales of more than shouts, the gaming mob unbearable now! Oh, what worlds we could build!
Brown, 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 brown.